The year of four emperors. The Roman Empire experienced an age of peace which historians refer to as the Pax Romana, under the rule of Octavian Augustus Caesar from 27 BC to 15 AD, and lasted until the death of Aurelius 161 AD to 180 AD. This period is characterized as being a time of relative peace for the empire. The frequent power struggles and frequent bloodbath accompanied by this time would show otherwise. The fifth emperor, Nero, to succeed Augustus as leader of the empire, was an actor, which at the time was not a good thing. Contrary to modern ideals about actors being celebrities and then moving into politics like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Ronald Reagan, being a former entertainer was an extremely lamentous history. Nero, as they say, had inherent lust and lack of self-control. He wanted to completely destroy Rome and build a new city. When a fire was lit, either by his instruction or an accident, he simply laughed at the sight and began to play the lyre. Dio Cassius tells us how he'd climb on the palace roof, from which there was the best overall view of the greater part of the fire, and sang the capture of Troy. The historian Tacitus tells that of the 14 districts of the city, 4 were undamaged, 3 were utterly destroyed, and in the other 7 there remained only a few mangled and half-burned traces of houses. The people and the Senate turned against him, and finally, after a number of assassination attempts and his attempt to regain power, the Senate condemned the emperor to be flogged to death. He thus committed suicide on June 9th, 68 AD. His last words were, "Qualis artifex perio." What an artist the world loses in me. Nero acted as an actor would, treating all of Rome like a show, killing with money and letting the streets burn. He liked the madness and the show, and in his death, that's the wake which followed him. The year preceding his death was a comedy in which killing balanced between homicide and suicide for each emperor. Assassinations and struggles for power became normal and almost comical, none of which seemed to resolve until after 3 emperors, one would take power and establish order. This is the beginning of the Flavian dynasty and the year of 4 emperors: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. Galba, the old man, the first in the year of 4 emperors. Galba had already been involved with Nero, and thus was selected by the Senate to take his place. However, Galba displayed such petty meanness and lack of generosity to the soldiery that the army, in consequence, transferred their allegiance to Marcus Salvius Otho, and Galba was slain after only a reign of 6 months. Servius Sulpicius Galba was born on the 24th of December, 3 BC, in a country villa near Tarracina, the son of patrician parents Gaius Sulpicius Galba and Mummia Archaea. Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius all held him in great esteem, and so he held successive offices as governor of Aquitania, consul AD 33, military commander in Upper Germany, proconsul of Africa AD 45. He then made himself an enemy in Nero's mother, Agrippina the younger. And so when she became Claudius' wife in AD 49, he retired from political life for a decade. Shortly after Agrippina's death, he returned and in AD 60 was made governor of Hispania Tarraconensis. Galba was an old disciplinarian whose methods owed much to cruelty, and he was notoriously mean. He was almost completely bald, and his feet and hands were so crippled by arthritis that he could not wear shoes or even hold a book. Further, he had a growth on his left side which could only be held in with difficulty by a kind of corset. When in AD 68 Gaius Julius Vindex, the governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, revolted against Nero, he did not intend to take the throne for himself, for he knew that he didn't command widespread support. Far more, he offered the throne to Galba. At first, Galba hesitated. Alas, the governor of Aquitania appealed to him, urging him to help Vindex. On the 2nd of April AD 68, Galba took the great step at Carthago Nova and declared himself the representative of the Roman people. This didn't lay claim to the throne, but it made him the ally of Vindex. Galba was then joined by Otho, now the governor of Lusitania, and gilded husband of Poppaea. However, Otho had no legion in his province, and Galba at the time only possessed control of one. Galba quickly began raising an additional legion in Spain. When in May AD 68 Vindex was defeated by the Rhine armies, a despairing Galba withdrew deeper into Spain. No doubt he saw his end coming. However, roughly 2 weeks later, news reached him that Nero was dead, and that he had been pronounced emperor by the Senate on the 8th of June AD 68. The move also enjoyed the support of the Praetorian Guard. Galba's ascension was notable for two reasons. It marked the end of what is known as the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and it proved that it was not necessary to be in Rome in order to win the title of emperor. Galba moved into Gaul with some of his troops, where he received the first deputation from the Senate in early July. During the autumn, Galba then disposed of Claudius Macer, who had risen against Nero in North Africa and most likely wanted the throne for himself. But before Galba had even reached Rome, things began to start going wrong. Had the commander of the Praetorian Guard, Nyphidius Sabinus, bribed his men to abandon their allegiance to Nero, then Galba had always found the promised amount too high. So instead of honoring Nyphidius' promise to the Praetorians, Galba simply dismissed him and replaced him with a good friend of his own, Cornelius Laco. Nyphidius' revolt against this decision was quickly put down, and Nyphidius himself was killed. Did the disposal of their leader not endear the Praetorians to their new emperor? Then the next move ensured that they hated him. The officers of the Praetorian Guard were all exchanged by favorites of Galba's, and following this it was announced that the original bribe promised by their old leader, Nyphidius, was not to be reduced but simply not to be paid at all. But not merely the Praetorians, the regular legions too, should not receive any bonus payments to celebrate a new emperor's ascension. Galba's words were, "I choose my soldiers, I do not buy them." But Galba, a man of enormous personal wealth, soon displayed other examples of dire meanness. A commission was appointed to recover Nero's gifts to many of the leading figures of Rome. His demands were that of 2.2 billion sesterces. Nero had given away. He wanted at least 90% to be returned. This contrasted wildly with the blatant corruption among the officials Galba himself appointed. Many greedy and corrupt individuals in Galba's new government soon destroyed any goodwill towards Galba which might have existed among the Senate and the army. The worst of these corrupt officials was said to be the freedman Icelus. He was not only rumored to be Galba's homosexual lover, but rumors told of him having stolen more in his 7 months in office than all of Nero's freedmen had embezzled in 13 years. With this sort of government in Rome, it was not long before the army revolted against Galba's rule. On the 1st of January AD 69, the commander of Upper Germany, Hordionius Flaccus, demanded his troops to renew their oaths of allegiance to Galba. But the two legions based at Mogontiacum refused. They instead swore allegiance to the Senate and the people of Rome and demanded a new emperor. The very next day, the troops of Lower Germany joined the rebellion and appointed their commander Aulus Vitellius as emperor. Galba tried to create the impression of dynastic stability by adopting the 30-year-old Lucius Calpurnius Piso Licinius as his son and successor. This choice, however, greatly disappointed Otho, one of the emperor's very first supporters. Otho, no doubt, had hopes for the succession himself. Refusing to accept this setback, he conspired with the Praetorian Guard to rid himself of Galba. On January 15, AD 69, several Praetorians set upon Galba and Piso in the Roman Forum, murdered them, and presented their severed heads to Otho in the Praetorian camp. Otho led a conspiracy among the Praetorians with the promise of material reward, and on the 15th of January they declared Otho emperor and publicly killed Galba. Then came Otho, the Grida ruler who lasted just 3 months, though the historian Tacitus would speak to the contrary. Marcus Salvius Otho was born at Ferentinum in southern Etruria on the 28th of April AD 32. His family did not belong to the old aristocracy, but had achieved political prominence under the emperors. His grandfather had been promoted from equestrian rank to senator by Augustus, and even came to hold the consulship, and his father received patrician status from Claudius. Otho was a companion of Nero, perhaps even his lover, until AD 58. They fell out over Otho's wife, the beautiful Poppaea Sabina. Otho ended up being divorced and sent away as governor of Lusitania, leaving the way free for Nero to marry Poppaea himself. At Galba's coup against Nero 10 years later, Otho was the first to declare his support. He subsequently won sympathy with the troops, showing concern for their hardship when on the march to Rome with them. And once in Rome, he became popular with his financial generosity towards the Praetorian Guard. Clearly, Otho styled himself, at least in his own view, as a potential heir to Galba's throne. This was based, no doubt, on the fact that he had been the first to pledge his support to the emperor. Though Otho was to be deeply disappointed when Galba chose Piso Licinius as his successor. Instead, Otho found other means by which to secure himself the throne. Not merely was Otho popular with the army, but Galba was then loathed by the troops. It was therefore not difficult for Otho to involve the Praetorians in a plot against Galba, and so it was on January 15, AD 69, Otho was invited to the Praetorian camp, where he remained, whilst Praetorian horsemen set upon and killed Galba and Piso at the Forum. Their severed heads were then brought to him, and Otho was hailed emperor by the Praetorians. Faced with such facts, the Senate had little choice but to confirm Otho as emperor, although seeing how Otho, having taken power, and knowing him a former friend of Nero's, the Senate regarded the new emperor with deep suspicion. Despite this, they voted him the usual power and privileges, and it can be said that Otho, during his short reign, governed with energy and ability. The provinces, in fact, swore allegiance to Otho. On temple walls in Egypt, he was depicted as Pharaoh. Hoping, no doubt, to win the favor of the remaining supporters of Nero, Otho ordered that the statues of Nero be restored. He even reinstated some of Nero's officials. Though Otho never managed to overcome his reputation for extravagance he had earned in his younger days, and so the quality of his reign came as a surprise to many. The historian Tacitus reports, contrary to everyone's expectations, Otho made no dull surrender to luxury or ease. He put off his pleasures, concealed his extravagances, and ordered his whole life befitting the imperial position. In build, Otho was a small man, with bow legs and feet that stuck out at each side. Vain, he had his body plucked of hairs by servants. He even wore a wig to conceal his thinning hair. Apparently so well made was this wig that no one suspected. But in his claim for the throne, Otho had made a vital miscalculation. Was he popular with the praetorians and with some of the troops he had accompanied on his way back to Rome? He had very little links to the army at all. In his role as governor of Lusitania, he had not even had control of a legion, and yet he depended more completely on the soldiers' support than any of his predecessors. His lack of contact in the army, therefore, also